Last week we had the discussion in regard to trucking rates and an inquiry that's coming to Dubbo on the 23rd of June. It's to discuss the abolishment and indeed the decisions beforehand of the Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal, which was abolished by the Parliament just before it had a double dissolution. Now, in that time, there was 2 weeks in which the payments had changed, and there is an inquiry into what kind of impact that had on truck drivers, companies, and indeed, in general, the business. Now, that inquiry, though coming to Dubbo last week, was assured that it wasn't a witch hunt by Kate Carnell, who features from the ASBFEO, or the Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman's Office. To dispute that, though, is the Transport Workers Union, who have been invited to be a part of the inquiry. Joining me this morning to have a bit more of a chat about this inquiry and perhaps what effect it may have is Richard Olsen, who is the New South Wales Acting Secretary of the TWU. Richard, good morning.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
Will the union be part of this inquiry?
We'd like to be. Unfortunately, their first meeting was at the commencement of our National Council, so we were unable to attend. But as the meetings unfold, if there is the opportunity, then we see that we have a place to play within that space.
Richard, when we spoke to
representation,
when we spoke to Kate Carnell last week, she said that the invitation had been offered for the union, and indeed she listed that would be a part of the key conversation. But just from the notes that the union have sent through, you believe that it's only a 2-week period. Do you see that the inquiry is necessary?
The inquiry as set up is not necessary. I really dispute the real essence behind what the inquiry is trying to establish. There's much better things in which the inquiry could be looking at than going around New South Wales and talking to a select group of transport operators. With the
abolishment, though, of the tribunal, is this something that you just hope goes away as well? It seemed to be a very messy time, and of course there was heavy protests, heavy anger against not only yourselves but the RSRT, the Labor Party at the time. This inquiry, is it dredging up things that you'd much rather just let go of?
Oh, no, not at all. No, but there's much better things in which the inquiry could be looking at. The order actually gave owner drivers 30-day payment off their for their service to any client instead of 60 to 90 or 120 days wait. And that's one of the fundamental problems why small business transport operators go broke in this country. Is cash flow is so tight, margins are really tight. When you've got to wait 120 days to be paid. Has a real impact on cash flow, and that's why you see many of our small operators, business operators, go broke. Be they only owner drivers, they can't afford to wait that length of time. That's a real issue.
Richard, in the light of day, after the abolishment of the RSRT, when we spoke to Kate Carnell last week, and the heavy argument, of course, for these rates to continue was to compare safety and rates and bring them together. Now, Kate Carnell said to us last week that was a step too far. In the light of day, after the abolishment, do you agree?
No, certainly don't. And that's a ridiculous statement to make. You look at the inquiries into the transport industry over the last 2.5 decades, all agree on one thing. Rates of pay and safety are inherently linked. And for her to come out and make such a ridiculous statement just shows how far removed that she really is from the transport industry and understanding how this works. There was an order put down through the RSRT which affected a very small proportion of operators. So to abandon the whole RSRT because of some small order is totally ridiculous. It's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We should have been continuously working and implementing of the orders that was put down by the RSRT, but saving the RSRT to continuously moving our transport industry forward, making it more efficient and productive and indeed safer. Safer on our roads for the transport operators and the travelling public. That's what the conversation we should be having, instead of abolishing something and now we have nothing to do for the future.
Well, when you say you have nothing to do, though, the work of the RSRT Some of it has been carried over to the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator. Do you believe now that the NHVR will not carry forward the work of the RSRT?
They certainly don't have the skill base to carry on. That was never their charter. So we're now going back more than 10 years of work prior to the establishment of the RSRT, and indeed within the framework of the RSRT. They have no skill base in that. They have no people or policies to move that part forward. So they may be doing something, but it's going to take us way back where we don't need to be. And let's not forget, most operators out there work under contracts far in excess of what the RSRT order was going to introduce. People who may have been affected are the people who are right on the breadline, who have been working for a very small payment. And this payment would have actually given them a small increase. To nowhere near extent that they will be out of the system within the transport industry. That's just a ridiculous statement to make, and no proof has ever been put forward. Indeed, most people who showed up on that day in Canberra were not owner-operators, but were indeed employers.
Richard, I appreciate your time for this morning. The inquiry will come to Dubbo on the 23rd of June. Are you hopeful you'll have delegates at that meeting?
I'm sure we will. Thank you for your time.
I appreciate your time too. Thank you. Richard Olsen joining us this morning, who is the TWU New South Wales Acting Secretary on that inquiry that will come to Dubbo in regard to the tribunal rates for truck drivers in particular, which focused in on owner drivers and the changing of their rates. That inquiry is to be held by the ASBFEO, or otherwise known as the Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman's Office.